We have now reviewed more than 60,000 photographs and videos, along with thousands of emails contained within the Epstein files. What emerges from this material is not a single explosive revelation, but something more unsettling. A dense web of proximity, access, and unanswered questions involving some of the most powerful figures in business, politics, and global influence. Before going any further, one point must be made absolutely clear. Appearing in the Epstein files does not, by itself, imply criminal wrongdoing. The files contain contact lists, photographs, calendar entries, draft emails, and internal notes, many of which were never sent, never acted upon, and never corroborated. Association is not guilt. Allegation is not proof. That distinction matters, and it will be respected throughout this analysis. That said, the scale of the material forces a broader reckoning. When individuals with immense power repeatedly appear in the orbit of a convicted sex offender, it raises questions, not necessarily of criminality, but of judgment, transparency, and accountability. One of the most prominent figures to face renewed scrutiny is Bill Gates. A photograph of Gates appears within the Epstein files. The image itself provides no context, no date, no location, no indication of the circumstances under which it was taken. On its own, it proves nothing. But its presence has reignited public attention, particularly in light of other material connected to Epstein's private correspondence. Among the documents reviewed are emails Jeffrey Epstein sent to himself, drafts that were never transmitted to anyone else. These messages are significant not because they establish facts, but because they reveal Epstein's own claims and narratives about the people he associated with. The Epstein files keep revealing new names, new claims, new controversies, and now Bill Gates is in the spotlight. But context matters, crucial context. One of the files contains a draft email Epstein wrote to himself. Never sent, never delivered, private, yet explosive. In it, Epstein claims that Gates contracted a sexually transmitted infection. He alleges Gates then tried to secretly give antibiotics to his wife at the time, Melinda Gates. Pause for a moment. That's the claim. That's it. There is no evidence beyond Epstein's unsent self-addressed email. Nothing corroborates it. No witness, no document, no testimony. Gates has responded, firmly, publicly, unambiguously. He calls the claim false. He has said he regrets ever meeting Epstein, and that's not the only claim. Another email, also never sent, alleges Epstein helped Gates obtain drugs to manage the consequences of sexual encounters with Russian women. Again, no evidence, no corroboration. Gates has denied this allegation completely, repeatedly, consistently. There is an important, unavoidable fact here. Gates has never been accused by any of Epstein's known victims. No criminal complaint, no civil lawsuit, no sworn testimony. Not a single legal proceeding has implicated him in Epstein's crimes. And yet, his name appears in these files. Why? Because Epstein documented everything. Everything. Unsurprisingly, some names show up in ways that are misleading. Gates himself has said the meetings with Epstein were a mistake, plain and simple. But he emphasizes their nature. The meetings were limited, dinners, discussions about philanthropy, no trips to Epstein's island, no encounters with alleged victims, no secret rendezvous, nothing like that. It's easy to conflate appearance with guilt. Seeing a high-profile name in a file can feel damning, dramatic, irresistible for headlines. But the law and basic fairness requires proof. And in this case, there is none. The emails are unsent drafts, private notes from a convicted sex offender, a man whose own credibility is entirely destroyed. Epstein's words alone are not evidence. They are accusations without verification, speculation disguised as fact. Gates' response is calm, measured, precise. He acknowledges a mistake in judgment, that he engaged with Epstein at all. But he draws a clear line. He has done nothing illegal, nothing immoral connected to Epstein's crimes, nothing that victims could accuse him of. That distinction is critical because the Epstein files are a storm of information, some of it verified, some of it completely unverifiable, some of it damning, some of it irrelevant. For Bill Gates, this is the difference between being implicated and being named, between public curiosity and criminal inquiry, between rumor and evidence. The emails themselves are fascinating, morbidly interesting, and yes, troubling. But the legal and factual record is clear. Gates has not been charged, has not been sued, has not been accused. The man who helped build Microsoft, the man whose work reshaped global technology, is facing allegations based solely on unsent notes by a convicted sex offender. He regrets meeting Epstein. He owns that mistake. But he also stands firm against the unfounded claims, insisting that truth matters more than gossip. In the maelstrom of revelations, that line, between documented fact and unverified accusation, has never been more important. Because in a world chasing sensationalism, clarity is rare. And in this case, clarity protects Gates. He was at the table. He met Epstein. But he was never in the room where the crimes happened. The emails may stir debate. They may generate headlines. But they do not create guilt. Not legally, not morally, not credibly. They are simply a reminder. Appearances can be deceptive, and truth requires scrutiny. He addressed this directly in a televised interview on Australia's Channel 9. I met Jeffrey in 2011, Gates said. Over a period of 3 years, I had a number of dinners with him. The focus was always that he knew a lot of very rich people and said he could get them to give money to global health. Gates emphasized that he never visited Epstein's private island, never met women through him, and never engaged in any sexual activity connected to Epstein. It's factually true that I was only at dinners, he said. I never went to the island. I never met any women. He added that while those meetings were a lapse in judgment, they had nothing to do with the criminal behavior that later came to define Epstein publicly. As more material surfaced, Melinda Gates, now divorced from Bill Gates, was asked about the renewed scrutiny. Her response was measured, personal, and revealing in a different way. She acknowledged that these revelations reopened painful memories from her marriage. For me, it's personally hard whenever those details come up, she said, because it brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage. But she made clear she had moved on. I purposely pushed it away and I moved on. I'm in a really unexpected, beautiful place in my life. She added that unanswered questions were not hers to resolve. Those questions are for those people, and for even my ex-husband. They need to answer those things, not me. Her comments did not accuse. They did not exonerate. They underscored something else entirely, the human toll of proximity to scandal, even without proven wrongdoing. Bill Gates is not the only high-profile figure whose communications with Epstein appear in the files. We also uncovered additional emails detailing the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson, the former British cabinet minister and European commissioner. In 2010, an email from Peter Mandelson surfaced. He mentioned visiting a spa, and then, in a single line, wrote, "Great apart from the lack of happy ending." A throwaway comment? A joke? That is unclear. But it catches the eye, because it contradicts what Mandelson has said elsewhere. He has stated publicly that as a gay man, he was kept away from the sexual aspects of Jeffrey Epstein's world. And yet here is an email with language that hints at something far more personal. Not illegal, not criminal, but provocative. It exposes a tension, a gap, a puzzle. It raises questions about how Epstein's circle operated, about what was private and what was public, about what people saw and what they pretended not to see. The inconsistency is striking. Mandelson presents one version of events in interviews and statements, and another version appears casually in an email to an associate, or perhaps just to himself. The tone of the email is light, almost flippant, but the context is heavy. Because it's connected to a network built around wealth, influence, and secrecy. A network where social norms were often suspended, where boundaries were blurred, where caution sometimes seemed absent entirely. That environment is central to understanding the Epstein files. Not every message is evidence of a crime. Not every remark signals guilt. But the culture it reflects is significant. It shows how ordinary discretion could be overshadowed by the extraordinary power dynamics surrounding Epstein. It illustrates the casualness with which sexualized language and risky humor circulated among high-profile figures. And it demonstrates how perception and reality could diverge. People could claim distance from sexual misconduct while casually commenting on it in private, or laugh about situations that, under normal circumstances, would demand restraint. This duality is what makes the files so complex. It is not always about what happened. Sometimes it is about what people thought, joked, or implied, and sometimes it is about what the circle allowed itself to assume without fear of consequence. The Mandelson email, brief as it is, captures this tension perfectly. It is not a smoking gun, it is not a legal indictment, it is a glimpse into a social world where the ordinary rules of caution, privacy, and propriety were suspended, where influence and wealth created a bubble in which boundaries could be tested and sometimes crossed. And that is what draws attention. Not the spa visit itself, not the words themselves, but the light they shine on the culture surrounding Epstein. A culture of blurred lines, casual secrecy, and sometimes reckless humor. It reminds us that in Epstein's orbit, appearances were carefully curated. Yet the private communications reveal cracks, the moments when the mask slipped. The emails, the messages, the jokes, they are all pieces of the puzzle. They do not accuse, they do not convict, they simply show how unusual and unguarded life could be among those who moved in Epstein's world. And in understanding that world, every detail, even a cryptic line about a spa visit, matters because it paints a portrait of influence, secrecy, and blurred boundaries that defines the entire network. Another exchange is even more striking because of its timing. On the day Epstein was released from prison in 2009, after serving a sentence for soliciting child prostitution, he emailed Mandelson with a short message, "Free and home." Mandelson replied, "How should we celebrate?" Epstein responded, "With grace and modesty." He then added, "Those are the names of 2 strippers." Mandelson replied, "From now on, grace and modesty should be discovered in London." Again, no crime is alleged in this exchange. But the casual tone, the sexualized humor, and the timing, immediately following Epstein's release from custody, raise serious questions about judgment and awareness. It is difficult to reconcile such exchanges with claims of ignorance about Epstein's behavior, particularly given what was already known publicly by 2009. Beyond emails and photographs, the files also include video footage that offers a rare and unsettling glimpse of Epstein in detention. In the video, Jeffrey Epstein appears in a setting that immediately raises questions. He seems to be speaking covertly. He addresses a man named Darren, or at least pretends to. But his words are clearly aimed at 2 unnamed women. We are not identifying them. The video leaves that intentionally vague. Every detail matters. The room, the echoing acoustics, the clothes he wears, all of it suggests one thing: Epstein is in custody. He is no longer the untouchable billionaire. No private jets slicing across the sky, no lavish parties, no exotic islands, no gilded mansions. In their place is a room that amplifies every word, every gesture. In the footage, Epstein makes an offhand remark about a sore on his face. A small detail, but loaded. He uses crude language, racist language. It jars the viewer. It is casual, almost flippant, but chilling in its context. A man stripped of power, yet clinging to bravado. He gestures toward pictures taped to a wall behind him. He explains that he borrowed Scotch tape to hang them. The act is mundane, ordinary, domestic. And yet it is surreal, given everything else we know about him. Gone is the facade of untouchable wealth. Gone are the symbols of influence and excess. What remains is a man in detention, attempting to maintain control, attempting to assert relevance, attempting, somehow, to preserve connection in a situation where every lever of power has been removed. The contrast is striking. Epstein's world of opulence, secrecy, and influence has been replaced by confinement and limitation. Every gesture, every word, carries an unintentional honesty. The way he talks, the way he moves, the way he directs attention to the walls and the pictures. It's a desperate attempt to shape perception, to assert that he is still someone who matters. And yet the video does something else. It humanizes the consequences of his crimes without excusing them. It shows what the fall from power looks like. It reminds us that the extravagant life he led existed in stark contrast to the reality of accountability. There is no glamour here, no mystique, no illusion of control beyond the immediate moment. Just a man in detention, performing small acts to reclaim agency. The jarring nature of the footage is not because it exposes new crimes. It doesn't. It is jarring because it strips away the mask, the billionaire, the networker, the charmer. All of it disappears, and what remains is raw, vulnerable, confined. A man once seemingly omnipotent, now subject to the most basic forms of control. The video reminds us that power is temporary, influence is conditional, and that even the most untouchable figures are, ultimately, human. What we see is both mundane and revealing. A man trying to hold on to relevance while the system closes in. Every word, every gesture, every glance is freighted with meaning. It is a window into the reality behind the headlines, and in that sense, the footage is almost more powerful than the wealth, the parties, or the connections, because it shows the consequences, the collapse, the human face of a system finally asserting accountability. This footage stands in stark contrast to almost everything else in the Epstein files, because nearly all of the other images show a very different story. A story of wealth, of influence, of access few could imagine. Private jets cutting across oceans, mansions lined with marble and gold, exotic islands with lavish parties, the life of a man who seemed untouchable. And then there is this video. No glamour, no mystique, just a man in detention, stripped of power, trying desperately to maintain control over a world that has already moved on without him. Gesturing to taped-up pictures on a wall, borrowing Scotch tape to make his surroundings feel familiar, talking casually, almost flippantly, while the reality of confinement presses in from every direction. It is mundane. It is ordinary. And yet, in that ordinariness, there is horror, because it is the endpoint of everything the Epstein files reveal. A man who built a network of wealth, influence, and manipulation, brought down to a room that amplifies his every word and exposes his fragility. It is a reminder of where that life ultimately led, of what happens when systems designed to contain power fail, or fail to act in time. And it is not just the footage that reveals this truth. The files also include a massive, more than 400-page FBI report, an investigation into Epstein's death while in custody. The conclusion: suicide, a finding that remains deeply controversial in public discourse. But the details in the report go far beyond the conclusion. They describe failures at every level of the system, jail supervision that was inadequate, cameras that were broken at critical times, protocols ignored or poorly executed, each failure stacked on the next, creating a perfect storm that allowed tragedy to occur. The report does not find evidence of homicide. It does not claim foul play. But what it does reveal is a system that failed catastrophically, a series of lapses and oversights that, together, made disaster inevitable. And when paired with the footage, the narrative is stark and undeniable. Here is the life Epstein lived. Here is the control he wielded. And here is the system's inability to contain him, until it was too late. The two together, the video, the report, tell a story that is more than the sum of its parts. They reveal the limits of power, the fragility of institutions when oversight falters, the human consequences of negligence, of privilege unchecked, of rules bent or ignored. It is shocking, not because of hidden scandals or secret meetings, not because of glamour or mystery, but because it exposes the collapse behind the spectacle. A man who once seemed untouchable brought to a room, speaking to empty space, gesturing at pictures taped with borrowed Scotch tape, and a justice system that, despite best intentions, could not prevent him from dying in a way that left questions, controversy, and lasting distrust. The files make it clear, wealth, influence, and secrecy can shield someone for a time. But in the end, accountability, whether through the law, the system, or fate, catches up. And the contrast is haunting. The billionaire lifestyle now replaced by the stark reality of confinement and failure. A life of excess reduced to ordinary moments under extraordinary scrutiny. A system exposed, and a cautionary tale written in video footage and FBI reports alike. For many, Epstein's death closed the door on accountability. For others, it ensured that the full truth would never emerge. What these files collectively reveal is not a single conspiracy or a unified criminal network. They reveal something more fragmented and, in some ways, more troubling. A culture of elite access in which proximity to power insulates individuals from scrutiny, consequences, and often self-reflection. Many of the people named insist they were misled, that Epstein presented himself as a financier, a philanthropist, and a connector, that they attended dinners, exchanged emails, and moved on. That may be true in many cases, but the question the files force us to ask is not simply whether crimes were committed, it is whether standards of judgment collapsed when wealth and influence entered the room. Epstein did not operate in secrecy. His conviction in 2008 was public. His reputation, at least in outline, was known, yet access continued, meetings continued, correspondence continued. Why? Some argue it was opportunism, Epstein promising introductions, funding, or influence. Others point to arrogance, the belief that proximity to danger did not apply to them. Still others suggest something more systemic, a normalization of risk within elite circles that do not face ordinary consequences. What is clear is that Epstein did not exist in isolation. His power derived entirely from the people willing to engage with him. At the same time, caution is essential. The existence of an email, a photograph, or a meeting does not equate to complicity in crime. To suggest otherwise would be unjust and irresponsible, but dismissing the material entirely would be equally irresponsible, because beyond individual allegations lies a broader lesson about transparency, accountability, and the cost of unchecked access. The Epstein files are not a verdict, they are a mirror. They show how easily influence can obscure judgment, how quickly ethical lines blur when power, money, and opportunity converge, and how devastating the consequences can be, not just for victims, but for institutions, families, and public trust. For some figures named, scrutiny will fade. For others, questions will linger. For Epstein's victims, the damage is permanent. And for the rest of us, the files pose an uncomfortable challenge: to demand higher standards from those who shape the world, not only in their actions, but in who they choose to sit down with in the first place. Because sometimes, the most revealing evidence is not what someone did, but who they thought it was acceptable to be associated with. And that question, unlike many others in the Epstein case, does not require a courtroom to answer.